Greetings, Ad Age Insiders. It's February 27th, and I've got another really great marketing story for you. This week, we're talking all about media rebates and principal based media buying, what that is, why those things are making headlines, and the questions you need to be asking your agency about them. This is Ad Age Insider, where I'm taking you behind the scenes of the industry's biggest stories with the reporters who actually wrote them. I'm Parker Heron. Make sure to hit like and follow wherever you're watching so that you're never behind on industry news. So, a recent lawsuit against WPP Media has the industry buzzing about the potential dark sides of media agency practices. We'll get into the specifics of that case in just a moment, but overall, it's put a spotlight on agency transparency around media rebates and principal media buying, those terms that we'll get to. They're a little bit in the weeds, but please don't turn this video off just yet, because they can also have major implications on your relationship with your media agency and perhaps could even be costing your brand money that you're owed. So definitely keep listening. I have agency reporter Ewan Larkin on with me today. We're going to be breaking down the basics of what media rebates and principal-based media buying are, as well as what's going on with this lawsuit, and a few lessons you need to know to make sure you aren't on the wrong side of the conversation and just don't know it. So let's get into it. Hey, Ewan, thank you so much for hopping on today.
Hey, Parker. Thank you for having me. Good to be back.
Of course, always a pleasure to have you, and really excited to talk to you today about media rebates, principal media buying, things that when I hear them, I think, oh, I'd rather not talk about that. But maybe having a little bit of a understanding about what they mean could be valuable for us. So I hope you're ready.
I think I am. Yeah, I'll do my best.
Yes, not instilling too much confidence, but being humble as always.
Right.
We love it. So let's start right with those basics that I mentioned because I need help. Ewan, help me. What is a media rebate?
Yeah, this is an interesting one. It's kind of vaulted back into the spotlight. Media rebates have been around forever, but a lot of people are talking about it because of two campaigns that came up. I'm sure we'll get into those in a little bit, but essentially, to put it, like, to distill it down to basics, is media rebates are kind of payments that agencies receive from media publishers for hitting spending targets with their clients' money. I think that's the easiest way to break it down.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm a media agency. I get budget from client. I spend it on buying ad inventory somewhere. And then the publisher of that inventory rewards me with a little kickback, right?
Precisely, yeah. Like, you could be spending that in different places, Meta, Google, any kinds of publishers. And then once you hit that threshold, they then return the money to you. And the charge here, or the drama, is kind of that agencies are then holding on to those payments instead of giving it back to the clients.
Drama indeed.
Drama indeed.
And we will get into that, but first I want to define our other key term here, another source of drama. What is principal media buying?
Principal media buying is essentially when agencies act as a principal. What does that mean? It means they're essentially like buying media from the publishers and then reselling it to their clients or reselling it in other places, at a premium. So they're making money off that,
Yeah.
reselling that media.
So you kind of gave us a little spoiler a moment ago, but if I'm a marketer, why should I care about those two things? Again, we'll get into some specific news items that have come up recently, but like, okay, cool, you're telling me about the practices of a media agency, and like, I just want them to handle my stuff. So why do I care about media rebates and principal media buying?
Well, I think that it's like important to kind of define like how the two are intersecting a little bit, because like we talked about media rebates in terms of like a cash payment that an agency is getting back for hitting that threshold, right? But like it's not only just cash payments that they get back. Sometimes they're getting back media inventory, which they're then bundling into their principal media offering and then reselling. So the two are tied together a little bit. And I think why clients should care is that the fact that the agency is getting these incentives and getting these kickbacks only comes from the fact that they have the client's money to play with in the first place, right? Like the only way that they're able to trigger those incentives is by using the client's money. So it stands to reason that the clients should then get that money back. And a lot of times when they do get that money back, it's kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy for the agency. A lot of times when they do get that money back, if it's in form of a cash payment, they're kind of reinvesting it in the media. So there's more dollars then flowing through the media agency's campaigns. But actually, in a lot of cases, at least what people are saying, and this has been brought up in reports, over a decade ago, is that the agencies are holding on to those. So clients should care because it's their money that allows them to get the rebate in the first place.
Yeah. So before we go any further, I do want a quick clarification from you. I think that when we talk about things like principal media buying, we think of like holding company agencies, the ones that are buying so much stuff that they're doing these big deals with the publisher where, okay, I'll just go ahead and buy all this stuff because they assume they're not going to have any problem fulfilling that demand among their clientele. Is all of this a holding company specific issue, or is it more broad than just those biggest agencies?
From the people that I talk to, I think principal-based media buying is more, at least more of the focus is on the holding companies just because of like the scale that they have and the buying clout that they're able to, like, they can cast such a wide net. So they're scooping up a lot of that inventory and then being able to resell it. But like, I'm sure we'll get into the Acadia stuff in a little bit. But when I was talking to Acadia CEO Jared Belsky about it, he was arguing that media rebates in terms of cash payments are more of like kind of an entrenched issue. Like it's something that's not just specific to the holding companies. It's something that some of the mid-sized players or, some of the players that aren't quite as big as, the biggest three or the biggest six holding companies in the world are able to trigger. Now, I don't think like some of the smallest, like some of your startup media agencies are going to be able to do that because while I don't know the spending targets, it's not something that somebody right out the gate can probably hit. But it does seem to be like rebates are more of something that affects the broader scheme of media agencies as opposed to just, those are the ad giants of the industry.
Yeah. So both of these topics, they are kind of separate practices, but like you said, they intersect. But the reason we're talking about them today is all about the idea of transparency and transparency between a client and their media agency, what they are or are not potentially being told about how their money is being spent. And it's interesting that, like you said, principal media buying is something that we think of a holdco agency doing because they possess so much, or not possess so much, but they do so much deal making with these big publishers. But then with something like media rebates, it can trickle down all the way to, mid-size agencies, like you said,
Mhm.
and just be something that marketers should be aware of, whether or not they're getting the full story from their agency. So now that we're on the same page about all of that, let's dig a little bit into the news of why these kind of in the weeds, oh, I'm reading the fine print items are coming out and being discussed more broadly. Specifically, you wrote about, and it's been picked up by not just trade magazines, but broader publications as well, a legal case between WPP Media and a former employee of theirs. So just give us a little top line on what's happening.
Yeah, really interesting one. I'll try and keep it brief because we could be here all day on this one. But essentially, there is a legal case between WPP and a former executive called Richard Foster, who is alleging that he voiced complaints about, an improper kickback operation at WPP and then was subsequently fired for that. So he's alleging that he was a whistleblower, that they terminated him because of that. And now, in his initial complaint, he referenced a 36-page document in which he said he proposed it to WPP Media CEO Brian Lesser. It was about propping up an entertainment division, but he kind of said that he had voiced, criticism and complaints of the rebates operation that they were running, and so WPP made the decision to voluntarily submit that document to the court. It didn't come about through discovery or anything like that. They submitted to the court, and now it's in the public domain, and it gives us a lot of insights into some of the rebates that they were getting back, as well as the trading inventory and how kind of essential it was to their commercial model. I'm happy to jump into some of that if you want to, but that's kind of the top line of how we got there and why we're talking about this document.
Yeah, so this former employee was saying like, "Hey, I submitted this documentation that WPP was not being transparent with clients about how their rebates were being used or deployed, and that in terms of principal-based buying, let me know if I'm right on this one, that they also were, taking a little too much off the top for themselves."
I want to make clear that that wasn't like the entire reason why he submitted that document. This was part of like internal documents that he was sending to Brian Lesser about making the case for propping up a new entertainment division. But he was saying in the process or in those pages that he had voiced these kind of criticisms and complaints about what they were doing in terms of rebate and trade inventory. And WPP has submitted and say, take a look at the case for yourself. Take a look at the document for yourself. He's not saying there's any wrongdoing or anything like this, read it there. The facts are plain to see, and I won't make a judgment on that. The lawyers will, but that's why we're where we're at.
Of course, yes. Neither of us are giving advice or making judgments there.
Yeah.
What's really fascinating to me is that like this level of insight into client spending and financials is pretty unprecedented for media agencies. Like that's usually kind of top secret info they don't want
Yeah.
people knowing about their clientele. So like what are your takeaways from that information?
Yeah, I mean, look, if you want to go to check out the specific breakdown of the clients, you can do that. There's some of it in our story. Google is dominating, or at least we should mention that this document was prepared in 2024, but it also references all the spending that was done in 2023. So at least, and it's Foster's account, we should say as well. But Google was dominating in terms of spending. I think what's actually kind of the more compelling figure to me, Parker, is one that comes earlier in the document. It's saying that Richard Foster was saying that the holding company, that being WPP, had generated roughly $1 billion in net sales from non-product related income. What that means is like rebates and that principal-based media buying, and that they had annual growth targets of 15%. That's a big number. I think what's interesting is that it's not like Foster's document is kind of exposing some new misconduct or anything like this, right? Like rebates and principal-based media buying is kind of the industry's worst kept secret. A lot of people know about it, but this is kind of it to see in plain, this is it in black and white. Like a lot of agencies will say that, it's a very minimal part of our business, but we're talking about $1 billion here. That's not an insignificant amount of money. So I think it kind of shines a flashlight on that. And then, that they had the ambitions of going to 15% year over year, with that kind of generating from that income. So I think it shows how important it is to WPP Media's commercial model. And, they say in there in the document, it says that, financial and client pressures are going to force us to have to continuously evolve this model. So you can see that it's like that's part of their direction of travel. And then, fast forward, that was in 2023. Fast forward this many years later, we're still talking about it. People are still saying they're going to get into it more. It's becoming a bigger part of the holding company's business. But it's interesting to have it kind of laid out so explicitly like this. We can see how much money they're making off. I mean, I think there's a good example in there about a TikTok partnership. Foster's talking about how a $70 million investment in TikTok produced $107 million in ad credits, which then they were able to sell to clients for roughly $98 million. So they're making about, a $29 million in net profit for WPP Media. I mean, that's really interesting. We get kind of insight into, how TikTok is thinking about this, but WPP Media and how much money they're able to make on investments. Like it's fine to talk about it, and certainly there has been discussion about it, but here we can see, the mechanics of how these deals work.
Yes, yes, and my brain is always spinning on numbers like these. I mean, this does not look similar to my bank account, so it
You
all
and
sounds large. You kind of answered one of my questions that I had for you, which is that, like, generally people do talk about these practices and say, "Oh, gross," and then nothing really happens. I mean, it's not a huge secret. There have been reports in the past that have generated a lot of buzz, and even, holdco media agencies will say in kind of business reports or, merger reports or anything like that, like
Yes.
discuss principal media buying as part of their business model. Like it's not necessarily like you have to dig and go too
Right.
crazy deep. So is it just the visibility into the numbers that makes this instance right now seem a little more prominent in conversation in the industry?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you talk about how it's like you don't really have to dig for it. That certainly is true. I remember us doing a story before IPG got acquired by Omnicom about them saying in earnings call, like, we've kind of been behind the curve on this, and it's something that we need to get into a little bit more. Competitors are ahead of us. So it's not like it's just like this is, pulling back the curtain entirely on principal media. But I think it's interesting because Foster's report kind of shows that a lot of WPP's proprietary inventory was allegedly going unused by its largest clients. But I mean, as we mentioned, like the only reason they can get them in the first place is the client's money. So I think that'll raise some eyebrows. Some of these people are not WPP's clients anymore, but I think it will prompt some marketers to say, okay, maybe it's a time to check about what our agencies are exactly doing with these kickbacks. Let's ask some questions. Maybe we get tighter language in contracts. But I think all it does is like, there's been a big conversation about transparency and how murky media can be. Things like this, I think, only kind of fan the flames a little bit, for lack of a better term. I think it prompts some marketers to say maybe it's worth having a conversation with our agencies. Maybe it's worth doing an audit. Maybe it's worth talking to the publishers to make sure that those numbers are accurate, to see exactly what the kickbacks are. I think all it does is kind of reignite the conversation, and it's a welcome one, I think, for the industry.
You mentioned the industry, and I'm wondering what the reactions you're hearing are.
What I can say about the reaction is I'm getting a lot of response from independent agencies that think this kind of thing could maybe. I don't think they're looking about it like this, but this is kind of an opportunity for them to show, like when you work with us, it's entirely transparent. Come audit us whenever you want. If you want to do that, we've got nothing to hide. The money is yours. We can only get these kickbacks because the money is yours, and we will return them to you. So I think a lot of people are seeing it as maybe an opportunity to show their offering and how they're different from the industry's biggest players. And I think one of the things that it's showing is another thing that I'm hearing is like it's kind of like an interesting it's kind of an interesting peek into commercial models. Like we're talking about this. Like I think there's a good quote from Jared Belsky in Acadia when I was talking to about it. He made this website called It's Your Rebate that's kind of like prompting marketers and procurement teams to kind of investigate media rebates. And he talks about if you were to remove that income stream abruptly from agencies, yes, some agencies would face existential risk, but that doesn't justify the practice. It kind of indicts it. If your agency's business model is so dependent on monetizing clients' money indirectly, then the model itself is broken. I mean, we're talking a lot about models in general, about what's happening under AI and things like this. So I think a lot of people are using this opportunity to talk about, ours is not dependent on this. We will return the money to you. Here's how we make money, and just kind of showing how they can be a transparent counterpart, or I guess counterweight to some of the holding company players.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I was going to bring up the story you wrote about the CEO of Acadia and his campaign there. Obviously, like when things like this happen for holdco media agencies, the smaller and mid-sized agencies are like, looks right for us.
Yeah.
And this campaign from him, very fortuitously timed, not connected to this at all. But I wonder, I've written before about like the change in how brands are approaching their agency rosters. And something that has come up before is that like small agencies are always a great idea, but these big brands like still frequently fall back on big holdco agency models. Do you foresee like any change in how brands, or have you heard from brands that are changing how they're thinking about how they work with agencies based on these conversations around media rebates or principal media buying?
I think to some degree it's too early for that, just like because some of this is like in the past weeks. And I think it's going to be difficult on like those big like multinational advertisers. I still think it's going to be hard to kind of wrangle those accounts away from holding companies, just because they're so massive. They work across 100 different countries and their needs extend beyond media. They've got creative, they've got influencer, they've got PR needs, and holding companies are usually the only space that can kind of accommodate all of that. They're the only ones that can function as a one-stop shop. But I will say that I think like I look to an agency like Known, for example. Like I think they're winning bigger assignments, not only because they have a transparent offering, but because they have platforms like Skeptic. They have pretty robust tech platforms. Tech actually like eats into scale a little bit. I think it helps you get there and be able to provide all that service without actually needing the headcount and needing to be in 50 different countries across the world. So I think you're seeing agencies like Known and some of that like kind of eat into the pie a little bit, into the holding company pie. I don't think they're taking over the entire count per se, but they're certainly a compelling offer rather to some of those mid-sized advertisers, and they're definitely making their presence known amongst the bigger ones too. I think it'll the trend of consolidation I do and expect to continue this year, but who knows? Maybe this will ruffle some feathers and maybe it'll prompt some people to look elsewhere.
If I'm a marketer and I'm hearing about all of this for the first time, you're blowing my mind open. What questions should I be asking my agency about this topic?
I think you should be asking, I think you should be making explicitly clear whether you're opting in or opting out to have incentives, right, with media deals. You should be making that clear, but then you should also be going and asking, what kinds of money are we getting back? Are we getting inventory back? Let's double check that. Like I said, ask the agency for those questions, and then I would actually urge you to go check that with the publisher as well to make sure that it lines up. You can kind of tighten up the language in contracts, but one thing that I should note, and this has been some of the kind of the feedback that I got since doing the Acadia story, is that when that K2 report came out in 2016, and for anybody that's not familiar, it was kind of exposing the undisclosed media rebates. There was a lot of calls to tighten up the language in contracts, but I feel like a lot of agencies kind of just then change the language. They can call it something else other than rebates. So it's always difficult, I think, to kind of make sure that the contracts are ironclad. But what you should do, definitely, no question, if this is something that you're curried about, is make sure that you can allow for frequent audits in the agency contract. I think this is something that a lot of marketers are, wising up to, that they need to do this, and you can get consultancies to help you, media consultancies, but make sure that you're allowing for that in terms of the contracts. And then just, I think it's worth having a candid conversation with the agency and then making sure that what they're saying lines up with what the publisher is telling you too. One thing that I heard from the likes of Acadia and others is that brands actually aren't asking the publishers themselves these questions, and maybe that's an extra step that they can do to be, to tidy it up a little bit.
Yeah, I think those are really good points because I think the takeaway for me from this conversation is not necessarily like agency's bad. They do these
No.
things, icky, gross. It's more, being sneaky is bad and not having transparency is bad. And the responsibility is on both the agency and the brand to make sure that the business is working for both of them and not just for one. So is that right?
Yeah, that's right too. And I think just the only part that I would add to that, Parker, is that publishers are not doing anything wrong by offering incentives, right? Like that's like a standard negotiating practice. We're not trying to indict the entire practice of incentives and kickbacks. It's just making sure that they're handled responsibly when they're then passed over to the agency.
Yeah, free stuff. Sign me
Yeah,
up. I'll do
exactly.
it.
Yeah, I'm in.
If people are following this story, they're listening now, they're like, okay, I need to be tapped in on this. What should they be looking out for next to know that, like, this isn't just another blip on the radar where people talk about it for a week and then it's gone? Is there anything we should be looking out for to know that, like, actually the conversation is changing this time?
I think it'll be interesting to see if this prompts any reviews or pitches like that. I mean, it would be hard for marketers to kind of come out and talk about that, I think, until the process is complete, or maybe they might not want to do that at all. It's their own business. A lot of this is sensitive data. There might be some more developments in the WPP lawsuit. I say maybe that's one to keep an eye on as well. But certainly, a shameless plug, you can keep an eye on Ad Age. We'll be keeping the conversation going and, kind of investigating what are the best ways to make sure that this is being handled ethically, and what you can do in contracts, and why audits are important. I think all that kind of stuff will be key to keep an eye on.
Amazing. Well, I mean, you said it perfectly. You know where to find this information. Adage.com is there and waiting, and Ewan Larkin's reporting is, like always, front and center on that homepage, so you don't even have to look far. So, Ewan, I really appreciate you coming on and opening up our brains a little bit on all of this.
Thanks for having me, Parker. This was great.
Thank you so much for watching. I really found that conversation educational. And if you liked it as well, please follow AdAge and like this video wherever you're watching right now. I'm Parker Heron, and this is AdAge Insider. I want to thank my guest, Ewan Larkin, and I want to thank you for watching. Have a great day.